Hi, my name is Brandon, and I'm an alcoholic and addict in recovery. One of the most difficult questions that I've struggled with throughout my life is, why do bad things happen to anybody? Not just good people, but anybody at all. I was raised in the church and taught to believe in a good and caring God who is all-knowing, all-powerful, and came to an age, in my early 20s or so, where I couldn't reconcile the idea of a good, all-powerful God with the fact that there was so much suffering in the world in general, but also in my own life. I felt very disjointed when it came to the idea that God could exist and so could this suffering. And that was one of the main reasons why I left the church, why I stopped believing in God. And as I've gone through my recovery, I have started to identify some very positive things that come out of suffering. In my own life, my suffering has led me to the point where I am now. But I still find it difficult to reconcile that with the kind of God that I was traditionally taught about in church, in Sunday school, that kind of thing. And I'm certainly not the only one. And that's why the next book I'm going to read is When Bad Things Happen to Good People by Harold Kushner. Harold Kushner is a rabbi. He's still alive, and he's a rabbi in the Jewish church who had a son who suffered from progeria, the disease that causes rapid aging of the body. And his son died when his son was just 2 days after his 14th birthday. And throughout his son's life, he wrestled with this question, and in tribute to his son's life, wrote this book. It was released 4 years after his son's death. And he wrote this book about how he thought through and how he came to terms with the God that he was taught to believe in, and the idea that there's still suffering in the world. I thought it would be very interesting to look at this book in particular. One, because this is one thing that draws people away from the church a lot. And it's not that I'm trying to evangelize or bring people back into the church. I myself am not in the church right now. But I thought it would be interesting to look at a problem that so many people have with organized religion and the traditional monotheistic God that most of us are used to. But I also feel like the idea of suffering in recovery comes up a lot. And what I've seen happen time and time again, and have felt in my own life, is that you, especially in the beginning of recovery, the beginning of sobriety, it's almost like the beginning of a new romance, where everything is so happy, nothing can go wrong. You think that you have found the one, and this is going to be a lifelong journey together, and you can't imagine anything ever happening that would cause problems in this relationship. And then something does happen. You disagree over something. In the case of recovery, maybe something bad happens. You lose your job. Someone close to you dies. And all of a sudden, what seemed like this very rosy, positive thing starts to disintegrate a little bit and starts to change and shift. And I have heard people talk about and ask themselves the question, why would I stay sober if I'm still going to suffer? What's the point of that suffering? And so that's the other reason that I wanted to read this book, is I want to explore a little bit more about what's the point of suffering? why do we suffer? What is the point of all of it? Of course, the easy answer is, well, suffering leads to growth if you focus the energies the right way. But I wanted to dig in a little bit more because sometimes those easy answers, they're not enough for people who are in the midst of that suffering. And they're definitely not enough for people like myself who, during some of my most profound moments of suffering, couldn't imagine using it as a means for growth. These days, if I suffer, if I have a argument with someone, or if I get really anxious about something, I am usually able to use some of the tools I've learned in recovery to refocus and learn something from that. But back in my most depressed states, back in when I was in my close to suicidal states during my active addiction, it was very difficult for me to do that and for me to justify the amount of pain I felt, and to understand why that could be positive. So these are all questions that I wanted to explore to try to get my own head wrapped around them a little bit, but also try to add a little context for anyone who finds themselves, not only from a theological perspective, but just from a regular life perspective, questioning the use of suffering, questioning the need for suffering, and also questioning and also living with kind of rose-colored glasses about whether suffering is going to happen, because unfortunately, most of us do deal with some level of suffering, tragedy, trauma in our lives. And it is, if it hasn't happened to you yet, it probably will. What do we do when that happens? These are all the questions that I hope to explore as I read through, again, When Bad Things Happen to Good People by Harold Kushner. So I'll start on the book tomorrow. In the meantime, hope you have a good day. If you have any questions you would like to get answered about suffering, the reason for suffering, please put them in the comments. Let me know, and I'll definitely keep them in mind as I read through the book over the next few weeks.